Alrighty, it's just about that time. Let's go ahead and get started with today's course. This is the Rewst 100 series. We are here together on Rewst 101. This is laying the foundations of automation. What we're going to be doing in this course is talking through the key concepts that we need to know when getting started with automation. So what are the things that we need to keep in the forefront of our minds as we begin our Rewst journey, our automation journey, and building our automations? Before we get started, a couple of items of housekeeping. First things first, at any time, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, right? I'll be keeping my eye out on the chat. So anytime you guys have a question, throw it in that chat. I'll find a good stopping point, and then we will address the question. So that's item number one. Item number two, everything that we're going to be talking about today in the slide deck presentation will be available to you. I'll get you a link to the slide deck at the end so that you don't have to frantically take notes or worry of any of the materials that we covered. So the slide deck will be available for you for your review later on. I think those are the big things. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's take advantage and get practice. Let's take advantage of the chat and practice using it. So if you are good to go ahead and type 1 into the chat. If you need a little bit more time, you can type 0 or anything to let me know, hey, need a little more time. Love it. I love it. Right. So a lot of what we're going to be doing today is talking through theory, best practice, etc. So we're going to be diving specifically into the platform tomorrow. So today we're going to spend time going through our PowerPoint deck, talking about these big concepts around automation. So a lot of the platform work will be starting tomorrow. And I'll drop a link later on if you need to sign up for that. Let's dive in talking about automation and the maturity model of automation that Aaron, our CEO, has sort of laid out for us. The big idea I want to emphasize here is that when we're looking at automation, there's generally two different things that we're looking to automate. The first thing we're looking at are tasks. These are fairly simple. There's not a lot of steps involved with task-based automation. So these are things like when a ticket is created, assign that ticket to somebody. Things like that, right? Not too hard, not a lot going on. These are our task-based automations. And generally, these are the things that you might think about when RMMs are automating. So those kinds of tasks. On the other side of the spectrum, we have process-based automations. These are the multi-stepped, multifaceted, usually more complex things involved when we're looking at automation. And these are generally the things that we're really looking to automate. These are things like user onboarding, user offboarding, billing reconciliation, things like that. These are the more, again, big things that we're probably looking to automate. We'll talk more about some of those things a little bit later. But just keep that in mind as we're looking at this slide. Two different big ticket items that we're looking to automate: tasks and processes. When we're looking at automation, a lot of us have already come into the conversation with big reasons why we want to automate. The classic ones that we all know and we all know are valuable for us are things like saving time and reducing errors. We know that automation, computers, etc., can run 24/7, 365. So they do things that we can't in that realm, running forever. So long as they're configured correctly, right, they are going to always run the way that they're designed, right? Reducing errors. There's no sort of worry as to whether or not they're going to fill something out or do something right or wrong, so long as it's configured properly, thus reducing our errors. There are some other things in the realm of automation that we can really get huge benefits from. So things like improved decision making, so long as we're feeding a lot of information towards automation tools. They can comb through and process that data and give us results back, allowing us to uh, more better evaluate the data that's coming at us if we have more of it. More enjoyable work experience. I'm sure many of us have gone through tasks that are quite frankly mind numbing, right? You get hundreds or thousands of them and you put on a podcast in the background and you just kind of, just tune out and just do those very repetitive type tasks that don't really require much thinking power. Again, very mind numbing. Um, Automation allows us to remove those, let a computer or an automating tool like Rewst take care of it. So it frees up our minds to think more creatively and take care of the more challenging tasks that require a little more thinking power, making our lives better at the very least, so we don't have to take care of those mind numbing things. Automation also allows us to scale out our business rather than having to hire a lot of people, right? We can take some of the tasks that our existing people have, automate it so that they can work on bigger, better things. In that part of the conversation, what we really want to emphasize here at Roost is that we at Roost are using automation as a way of enhancing the current tools and the current people that we have or that you have. We are not in the business of trying to get rid of the tools that you have or get rid of the people that you have. So that's a very important idea here, right? We want to make things that you have better, bring out their full potential using automation. Right. As we're progressing through this course, we're going to be covering three big principles throughout the Roost 101 course. Let's hit the first principle here. I like to call this principle Aaron's Law. So principle one is Aaron's Law. And Aaron's Law says that you cannot automate a process that doesn't exist. If there's anything that you take away from this course, right, any one thing, it's this idea right here, Aaron's Law, that you cannot automate a process that doesn't exist, right? It sounds very trivial. It sounds very obvious, but you would be surprised how many people go into automation thinking they want to automate something, but don't have it in existence, or they don't have a goal of what to automate. So it's very important that we bring whatever it is that we want to automate into existence. And I'm sure for many of us here on the call, we already have an idea of what we want to automate and how that automation might look. So by adhering to Aaron's law of bringing our automation into existence, it gives us a lot of things that we can work with. You will have a starting point, you'll have some sort of ending point, you'll define specifically what does success look like, and you'll have at least a decent idea of the mechanics of your automation. Do this, and then do this, and then do this. Right. You'll need these sort of things just to get started with automation. When we're bringing our automation into existence, we're not saying that you need every single minute detail, every I dotted, every T crossed. What we are saying is that you'll need to bring a general idea of how this automation is going to look. Again, how does it start? How does it end? What are some of the details in between? So very, very important that we adhere to Aaron's law, bringing our automation into existence. One of the most fundamental and important foundational aspects of automation. So Aaron's law says you cannot automate a process that doesn't exist. So let's make sure to bring it into existence. Right. Let's say we are getting started with automation and we need to identify where we want to start specifically. So you might be thinking, okay, Eddie, I hear you. Yes, we need to bring something into existence, but what should I bring into existence? What sort of tasks, what sort of processes should I bring into existence so that we can automate it? So this slide here is highlighting some of the things that we want to consider when we are picking the right tasks to automate. So we want to start off by looking for tasks that are time consuming, that there are a lot of them, and that they're error prone. Right? Those are probably the three core tasks that we're going to be identifying from the get-go, those types of things. From there, you may want to look for things that have some sort of regulation or compliance behind it. Again, tying back to the error proneness of a task. Of course, we want to automate things that our customers may demand from us and that they can be automated. And finally, the last thing we may want to consider is the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule basically says that there is a small amount of effort, the 20%, that yields a large amount of results, the 80%. So there might be a task, right? It might be a 20% kind of task. It might be one of the few things that you do in a plethora of many, but it yields 80% of the results. So it could be a task that brings 80% of your income, a task that brings 80% of your time consumed, things like that. A real life example of a 80-20 rule kind of thing is how much time we have in a day. So in our 24 hours, something that we're probably doing for the majority of that day is sitting, right? So the amount of time we sit in our desk probably is a 20-80 kind of thing, or 80-20. Or another example is in the 24 hours in our day, we spend the vast majority of that day sleeping, uh, working, and then maybe gaming, depending on where we are in our lives, right? Those three tasks, right, are, again, very few amount of tasks in our everyday, but yields or takes up a large amount of our time to sleep, work, and then whatever recreational things we have. When we're looking at those sort of things, we also have a number of rules around automation that we want to adhere to. So when we're looking to automate something, we want to make sure that whatever it is that we're automating is solving at least one of those problems on the left-hand part of the slide deck. We'll also want to make sure that whatever it is we're automating is technically possible, both in the sense of we have the tools and the capabilities of making the automation, as well as the automation can actually be done. That we're not trying to automate something that literally is not possible. And again, adhering to Aaron's law, we want to make sure that as we are picking what to automate, we bring that automation into existence, whether you draw it out, pseudocode it, outline it, etc. Right? By doing so, it gives us all of those things that we talked about: starting point, ending point, how does it work, and the in-betweens. And a couple other things that we want to consider, like how are we going to maintain it, and can we reuse it in the future? So some of the things we should consider as we are picking and choosing what to automate from the beginning. So we talked about the whys of automation. We talked a little bit about what should we automate. Let's start talking a little bit about who, right? Who should we consider to bring into this process of automation, right? There's going to be people like your techs who have a lot of tasks or processes that we can help alleviate some of the frustrations or pain points over there. Same with our customers, same with our back office. So all of that to say is keep in mind of the other people that we could serve with Rewst and with automation. But more importantly, or very importantly, is our boss's boss, and our C-levels. Right? These are people that we need to also consider as well. That is because of our second principle of the three principles we're talking about. So the first principle was Aaron's law. The second principle we want to highlight here in the 101 course is automation is forgettable. There are many automations that occur in our everyday lives that are of huge value. They save us a lot of time, but because it's a part of our everyday, we don't even think about them being automations. So one of the examples I really like is direct deposit. Again, back in the day, right, when we got paid, we would have a physical paycheck. You would have to sign that paycheck. You would go down to the bank or the ATM. You shoved it in the machine or you gave it to somebody. They did whatever they needed to do, and then we'd have to drive back home, wait a couple days, and then all of a sudden, money is in our bank, right? It's a kind of lengthy process back in the day of having to go to the bank, get your check over there, and then come back home. But nowadays, we have direct deposit. So every pay period, money just magically shows up in our bank account. We don't have to worry about going to the bank. We don't have to look at a pay stub. Money just shows up, and it's great. It's fantastic, right? Saves us a whole bunch of time in our everyday lives, right? And this is an automation that I'm sure many of us don't really think about too often, right? We don't think about, oh, the 10, 15 minutes I save by not having to go to the bank. And much of automation is very much like that. Another example is breathing, right? It's something that we all do. It's something that's automatic. And if I say something like, you are now in manual breathing mode, think about breathing through your nose and out of your mouth, or breathe through your mouth and out through your nose, right? It becomes very annoying when you have to think about breathing and you have to sustain your own life, right? This is, again, another automation that it just happens. We don't think about it, and right, it's part of our everyday, right? For many of us in the IT world, we've experienced a lot of those kinds of things where when everything is going right, people are wondering, what are you doing? What am I paying you for? Everything is going smoothly. But when things go wrong, right, that's a completely different story, right? And automation is like that too, right? When automation does what it's supposed to do, it falls into the background. So we spend a lot of time talking about the second principle because we want to set you guys up to be in a position where you are always able to show the value of what you're going to be building with automation, so that your boss, your boss's boss, the C-levels, etc., know specifically what they're paying for with Rewst and what they're paying you to do. And one of the ways that we show that is through time savings. What we're able to do in the platform is specify how much time we save every time the automation that we create runs. So let's say I have an automation, it saves me 5 minutes. I specify every time the automation runs, it's saving me 5 minutes. Rewst will then do the math and start calculating and adding up how much time you are saving as your automation runs. Do that across all of your automations, and in the dashboard of Rewst, you can just take a simple screenshot like this and say, hey guys, here is my slide deck of what's going on in the business. In the past week, we have saved this much time with the automations that we have created. Right? You guys can do the math on how much money that saves you, but on our end, we're showing specifically how much time we are saving by creating these automations. So a very simple way of, again, always keeping in the forefront of our minds why we're getting paid what we're getting paid, why we're paying for Rewst, right? We know the power of Rewst. We know that Rewst is valuable and it's saving a lot of time, saving a lot of money, saving a lot of heartache, right? A very easy way to show that is through time savings. When we're in the platform tomorrow, I'll show you guys specifically where we're able to specify that time savings. So principle number 2 of the 3 principles we're talking about, automation is forgettable. So we're going to need to find ways to combat that. So we're always showing the value of what we're doing. And one of the ways that we do that for you in Rewst is through this time savings. Speaking of time, we also need to be considerate of how much time we dedicate towards creating an automation. I'm sure there's a lot of automations that we can think about that are fun, exciting for both our company as well as for ourselves. But what we need to consider is how much time we dedicate towards an automation so that we're being mindful of the return on investment, right? We, at the end of the day, want to invest the amount of time necessary to create an automation so that we are actually saving time. So this chart here, courtesy of XKCD, they have a comic for everything. They also have a comic for automation. So this chart here is showing how much time we should dedicate towards an automation. So this chart here is saying if you have a specific task that happens, weekly, daily, monthly, etc., and it's going to save you this much time when you automate it, how much time should you dedicate towards creating the automation? So for example, let's say we have a task that occurs monthly, and that task takes us 5 minutes. So line up the 5 minutes in the monthly, gets us to this 5-hour block right here. So what this chart is saying here is across 5 years, so if you have this automation running for 5 years, and you automate a task that happens monthly and takes 5 minutes, we should dedicate around 5 hours towards that automation so that we can get a positive return on our development time across that 5 years. Again, this isn't written in stone. This isn't like the single source of truth. This is more so of a reference for you guys to be mindful of how much time you spend creating an automation. Alrighty. So we're spending a lot of time, again, talking about a lot of these key concepts because it's important to know these things when going into our automations. A couple of other things to consider when we're getting started is how to not get started with automations. These are sort of the red flags or the anti-patterns that some people fall into that we want to avoid. So the first thing that we want to try to avoid, or at least reconsider when this thought comes to mind, is trying to automate an entire process or the whole process as your first automation. Again, we at Rewst, we want you guys to automate those things. We want you guys to do something like user onboarding, user offboarding, bill reconciliation. These are things that we would love to see you guys automate and get huge amounts of time savings out of. The problem that we want to avoid is when we are getting started in trying to automate something that's really big, oftentimes we fall into this idea of biting off more than you can chew, right? By taking on too much too quickly, right? We haven't built up our technical expertise. We haven't got comfortable with the platform. There's a lot of things that we start encountering when trying to automate these big processes from the get-go, right? So rather than experiencing a lot of heartache trying to automate a big process, getting frustrated when it's not working, and falling into a sunk cost fallacy, what we want to do instead is start off small, right? Look for tasks to automate. Look for those, again, those more simple things from the get-go. Start getting your wins quicker. Start getting value out of the platform quicker so that you can build up everything that you need to eventually build that huge process that you want to automate. So rather than starting off big, we want to start off small, right? Looking for tasks rather than these entire processes. And what you'll come to find oftentimes is some of the tasks that we built can be included in these big processes, these big automations. So we want to avoid that when we're starting out, right? So avoid trying to build out these big things from the beginning. Next up is when you want to replace something with automation or with Rewst. So when the idea starts to bubble up of, hey, let's build a replacement for this tool here. Again, we at Rewst, we want to enhance and bring out the full potential of both your people and the platforms that you are using, right? We want to bring all of those things together so that they can work together. So again, if you're thinking about replacing something with automation, again, take a step back and reevaluate on that premise. Next up is you might identify a task or a process that, again, checks all the boxes that we talked about. It's saving you time, it's reducing errors, it's an 80-20 task, etc. The other thing that we need to consider when we're automating tasks or processes is the ripple effect of that automation, or what consequences occur when we automate it, both on the positive side and on the negative side. So this next example here is wanting to automate the upgrade of every client to the latest version of Windows. Again, saves a lot of time. It can be done, checks off a lot of our boxes that we talked about. Um, but what kind of experience does that bring when your client or your customer comes to the office on Monday and all the computers are on the latest version of Windows? It could not be the best experience for some people. And then the last idea here is, again, rehashing Aaron's law, right? If you, uh, there are instances where someone might want to try to automate something, but they don't have a clear understanding of how it works, or they have literally zero idea of how it works. Again, that's another recipe for a lot of heartache and frustration. So always take that time to bring that automation into existence. Again, adhering to Aaron's law that you cannot automate a process that doesn't exist. Alrighty. Before we push on to our next part of our lecture, I'm going to launch a poll or a question your guys' way, just to, again, solidify some of the things that we're talking about. All right. So there should be a poll on your guys' way saying, you should automate a process that doesn't exist to start gaining immediate benefits from Roost. So take the time to read the question or the statement and then answer with the and then provide the answer that you believe is either true or false. Right now, give a few moments here for you guys to answer. All right, going to be closing the poll soon. So if you still need to answer, feel free to do so. All righty, let's go ahead and close it out. So yeah, it is a gimme, but again, very important that we always want to bring our process into existence first, even if we're trying to get that immediate benefit or the immediate value of Roost. So very good. All right, let's talk through a couple of other ideas here. The next one here is around the idea of Roost, the platform itself. We know that Roost is technically a low-code platform. The coding language that we use is called Jinja, built off of Python. But just because our platform is low code doesn't give us the excuse of neglecting good software development practices and software architecture practices. We still want to use those principles that's been tried and true throughout the development world. And in the 200 series, we will dive into some of those and give you guys those things if you don't come from a software development world. Regardless of whether you do or you don't, when we're building automations, what we or the person that we want to consider or the persons is yourself of today, the yourself of yesterday, and then yourself of tomorrow. Right? We're here today to try to equip us with the tools necessary so that your future self can build fantastic automations and you can be gracious and thankful to your past self for all the things that they did. So always keep these three people in mind: yourself of today, yesterday, and tomorrow, right? Setting these three people up for success, regardless of where we are in our automation journey. Again, a lot of these concepts we will talk about in the 200 series. So if you have the background, great. Continue to leverage and implement those great programming paradigms. But if you don't, we want to equip you with those in the 200 series. So the 100 series first is going to give you the tools you need to be dangerous in Roost, to build your automations and things like that. The 200 series is refining those tools, right? Sharpening the axe so that you can build even better automations in the future. Right. So keep those people in mind, right? Roost is low code, but it doesn't give us the excuse to neglect our good practices. Alrighty, principle. Okay, for sure. Alrighty. Um, Last principle, right? So we said we're going to talk about three principles. This is the third principle here, laying out where we need to get started. So we spent a lot of time of the who, what, where, whens, and whys. I'm sure you want to know specifically, now I have this information, where do we get started? And so that's what principle number 3 is here to address. Principle number 3 says, when getting started with Roost, we are looking to automate tasks that are small, simple, and high frequency. So these are our SSH tasks. So not secure shell, but small, simple, high frequency tasks, or SSH. Right. By starting with those types of tasks, small, simple, high frequency, it allows us to automate something that's very simple, straightforward. There might not be a lot involved, so you can get those quick wins and get value quickly. Build your confidence in Roost, build your technical skills in Roost with those SSH type tasks, right? And it gives us a uh, great training ground to apply some of these principles that we've already talked about. Again, adhering to Aaron's law by bringing these things into existence. And because they're fairly simple, there's probably not a lot involved. You can probably do it in less than 5 minutes on the back of a napkin or an envelope. So again, principle number 3, when getting started with automation, start with the SSH tasks, small, simple, high frequency, or high volume. Alrighty. Okay, before diving into what the rest of the course is going to before diving into what the rest of the 100 series is going to look like, let's talk a little bit more about time. Again, when we're getting started with Roost, right, we're going to be spending a good amount of time getting comfortable with Roost, building our automations, right? If you're here throughout the course in the series, right, that's time that you're dedicating to that. And because of that, the amount of time we're dedicating um, does require even more time before we start hitting that positive return on investment or ROI on Roost, right? I'm sure all of us want to start getting those hundreds and thousands of hours of time saved by building these beautiful, um, beautiful, clean automations. But the reality is that takes time. That takes time to learn, takes time to build, takes time to debug, right? And so it takes time to get a positive return on investment for the automations that we're building. But and the but I was gonna say, but the big but, I already said it. But again, but the big but here is you can get value very quickly from Roost by adhering to what we were just discussing, right? By adhering to these principles that we're talking about. You might not be saving hundreds and thousands of hours, but very quickly you can start saving minutes. Those minutes becomes hours as you're building your technical skills, building better, bigger automations, saving you more time, right? And that builds up, it snowballs over time. So while it might take time to get a positive return on your investment in Roost, that doesn't mean we don't get value quickly from Roost, because we can. We can get value very quickly from Roost by adhering to the principles that we talked about and by learning the platform. So be encouraged. We are here to help you to get that value and get that positive ROI as quick as possible. And speaking of help, there are a lot of different places that you can get help. First and foremost, you're going to want to find the documentation for all of the tools that you're already using. So your PSAs, your RMMs, etc. Find that documentation, specifically the API documentation. It'll become very important throughout your automation journey. We here at Roost are here to help you. We are already here in CLUCK University, or CLUCK U. Our courses here are designed to present the sort of the necessary tools needed to get started quickly. So we're here for you. In the 102 course, that's where we start diving into the platform and start getting our hands a little bit dirty with Rewst, getting our claws dirty. So I threw a link in the chat here for the sign up if you want to sign up for any of the 102s now, 103s, etc. They're all there for you. Discord is another great place to get help. The community, both Rewst internal employees as well as people using Rewst are over there. It's a great way to get help, to get feedback, to throw your questions out there and see what other people are doing as well. So Discord is a fantastic way to get involved with the Rewst community, right? Discord.gg/Rewst. There are a couple of places there that'll get you up to speed once you've signed into Discord. A couple of other places that you can get help. On Thursdays, we have our office hours. Our office hours are designed for you guys to take what you've learned throughout the 100 series, apply it to your own automations, and then come to the office hours if you need to troubleshoot, debug, want to walk through something with a SME or subject matter expert to get help, right? So those Thursdays are available for you guys to get help on anything related to the training. And then on Fridays, we have our open mics. Open mic is split up into two portions. The first part of the open mic is where we at Rewst provide updates to what's going on in Rewst, the company. The open mic is where you get a lot of sneak peeks as to what's going on. So if you're at IT Nation or if you saw the announcements from IT Nation around our new development called application platform, that was announced prior to IT Nation in the open mics. Right? So if you want a sneak peek of anything that's going on in Rewst, the open mic is there. The second half of the open mic is dedicated towards showing off what people are creating. So both the highlights and the lowlights of automation. So it's a wonderful opportunity to see what other people are doing with Rewst. So those two links are there. You can click it directly in that slide. Let me go back. So you can click it directly in that slide there. And you can also see prior open mics on that URL there, docs.help.rewst/updates/rockopenmics. Alrighty. Okay, before we jump into the last part of our training, let's shoot off one last question here regarding what we've talked about today. So how should one approach getting started with automation? So feel free to read through those and select the answer that you believe is true. Four more moments here. All right, and we're going to be closing this out shortly. All right. So yeah, when getting started with automations, we should start with the small, high volume, low complexity tasks. Alrighty. So again, before we dive into the last part, very quick recap of the three principles that we talked about. The first one is Aaron's Law. You cannot automate a process that doesn't exist. Second principle is automation is forgettable. So we're going to need ways to combat that. And we at Rewst have a way of doing that through what we call time savings. And then the last one is how to get started. So when getting started with Rewst, we're looking for those small, simple, high frequency tasks. So SSH for short. For the rest of the 100 series, so starting from Rewst 102, we're going to be looking to automate a specific process. The process that we're looking to automate is the adding and removing of users from Azure AD groups, right? So there's some logistics around that. And adhering to Aaron's law, we should bring this automation into existence, right? So how should we do that? How should we adhere to Aaron's law? Again, there's a couple different ways we can do that. And so one of the ways we'll go through right now is just by going through these questions here. Again, identifying some of the key parts or the key aspects of the thing that we're trying to automate. So let's go ahead and go through each one of these questions. I'll answer them, and then we'll see where we're at the end. So starting off, what types of actions do we need, or what are we doing inside of the automation? So just based off of the problem statement or what we're trying to automate, we're immediately able to identify that we need to find the capabilities to add the user to a group and remove the user from a group. So fairly straightforward there in regards to our actions, adding, removing. Along with that, maybe we should let somebody know of what's going on, right? We don't want to make these changes in a vacuum. So maybe after we've made these changes, we found that they're all successful, let's let somebody know. So right now, we might not be able to figure that out specifically, but at least let's put that in the back of our minds right now. Right? We should let somebody know of these changes that we are making. The next question we should ask ourselves is, what data do we need? Right? What sort of information do we need in order for this automation to work? So based off of what we've been talking about so far, we need to know which user we're going to be modifying and which group they're going to be either added or removed from. And we need to know whether we are adding or removing. In Rewst, we are able to create forms. What we can do is we can create a form. We can have somebody fill out the form. And then once they submit the form, we can pull the data from the form and then use it within our automation. So that's one way we can collect data, is through a form within Rewst. The data that we need, we're going to need to know the user, going to need to know the groups. And then again, we're going to have to figure out how do we let somebody know of these changes that are being made. So who is that someone? And maybe in this situation, we can say the someone is the person filling out the form. So someone fills out the form, all of this runs successfully. Maybe they can get an email saying, hey, the user that you selected was successfully added or removed from the group that you picked. So all of that to say, right, not only do we need to consider what we're doing, but what sort of pieces of information do we need? All right, next up is with regards to how does our automation start? Now to define some of our Rewst terms or some of the terms that we use a lot in automation, automations are generally composed of two parts. The first part of the automation that we're usually thinking about is called the workflow. The workflow is the engine of our automation. It's what makes it run. It's the sequential steps that we're building. So when we're thinking about making an automation, most of the time we're thinking about making a workflow. This is the start from step 1, go to step 2, go to step 3. If this, go do that. Those types of things are all defined within the workflow, the engine of our automation. All workflows within Rewst have to have something that starts it. These are called triggers. So a trigger starts the workflow. And so this question is just basically saying, what triggers my workflow or what starts my workflow? In Rewst, there are a lot of different ways to start a workflow. So you can say something like, if a ticket is created, or if a form is submitted, or if a user is added. These are all examples of specific triggers. In our case, the trigger that we're going to be using is going to be when a form is submitted. So what we'll do is we'll build out a workflow, and then we'll say, in order for this workflow to start, we're going to have a form that's submitted. We pick which form, and once it's submitted, it'll start the workflow. So this is a question that'll always have to be asked and answered when we're building workflows. What triggers the workflow? Okay, so big ideas here before moving forward. Triggers starts a workflow. Within triggers, we can collect information from the specific action that the trigger is configured for. So again, in our case, we are configured to listen or be triggered by a form, and then we'll collect information from the form. And then the last question we're going to ask ourselves here is, what other details do we need to consider? And in our situation, we need to consider that there are different types of groups. There are some groups that are managed by Microsoft Graph. There are other groups that are managed by Microsoft Exchange Online. How do we determine that? We're going to go through that later on in the course. But for now, we need to consider there are different types of groups managed by different applications. How do we figure these things out? Right. So again, these are some of the big questions we need to ask ourselves when we're going through this bringing the process into existence type of thing. And for some of us, right, going through this exercise exactly as I did it is exactly what you needed, right? For some of us, this is, very clear. You might be thinking, Eddie, I know exactly what you're talking about. This is great and fantastic, and I'm ready to automate. But for some of us, me included, when I first saw this, we're still left with this question here of, okay, I know what you're talking about, but it's still not clear to me. What exactly are we going to automate? So again, there are many different ways of automation and bringing our automation into existence. Talking it through in a couple of slides is one way, and another way is through just drawing it out. So if you'll give me 1 second, let me head over here. And then, do you guys see the whiteboard here? If you see the whiteboard, let me know in the chat. If you see something else, also let me know. Yes, on the whiteboard. Awesome. So let's go ahead and just whiteboard out the process that we just talked about. And so again, the process that we want to automate is adding or removing users from Azure AD groups. And so I can start here at the top, and this could be my trigger. So I'll say the trigger is when a form is submitted. And then this is my trigger. From my form, right, we can collect some pieces of information from it, like the user, the group, and then whether we are adding or removing. Let's call that the action. So plus or minus here. Again, knowing a little bit of how this works, I know that I'm going to have to figure out what type of group I'm going to be working with. And depending on the type of group, I'm either going to be using Microsoft Exchange Online, EXO for short, or Microsoft Graph, MSG for short. So I'll need to figure out that logic. And maybe right now it's not too clear, but let's just say I know how to do that. Once I figure that out, we'll then need to figure out whether we are adding or removing that user to or from a group. So something like this. And then this can be exchange, remove. And then this over here could be something like exchange, add. And then this side over here for Microsoft Graph is kind of the same, right? We're going to either add or remove. Then over here, Microsoft Graph remove. And then over here, we'll say Microsoft Graph add. And then all of these will be brought together at the end of the day so that we can send off an email to the person who sent or submitted the form. Right? And our automation will look something like this. And in a span of not even 5 minutes, right, we have our automation in existence. Right? This is just chicken scratch, right? I spent very little time drawing this out. I had a decent understanding of how this automation is going to work. And again, just on a very quick, you know, drawing pad here, we're able to bring that automation into existence. So how much more are you able to fill in a lot of these details in your own automations, right? How much more precise, how much more detailed will your outlines be for whatever it is that you're trying to automate, right? So again, while this step might be kind of obvious and might be in our heads, it's also a very important step, right? So take that time to bring your automations into existence. All right. So let's jump back into our slides here. I need to present in Teams, waiting for my deck to load. We will try again in Teams, open in Teams, and then we'll present. All right. So with our last few minutes here, let's talk through what the next couple of sessions are going to look like. In Rewst 102, we're going to start building out our automation. We're going to start specifically with the MVP, or the most viable, the beginnings of our automation or our workflow. In Rewst 102, we're going to start off building a form. We're going to build our workflow, and then we're going to see how do we trigger our workflow. So all of this is going to be hands-on in practice in Rewst 102. As mentioned, Rewst is a low-code platform, and the coding language that we use is called Jinja. In Rewst 103, we're going to take the time to investigate Jinja. What is its syntax? What can it do? And how do we make Jinja do what we want it to do? So a lot of how Jinja works is covered in Rewst 103. In Rewst 104, we're going to talk about two big Rewst features. The first one is called option generators. This allows us to control what options show up in a form field. The generic API allows us to fully leverage the API of a specific platform that's connected with Rewst. So if we're using something like a ConnectWise application and we want to utilize the full API of that app or that platform, generic APIs helps us out with that. In Rewst 105, we're going to go through and implement our Microsoft Exchange Online actions of adding and removing a user from a group that's managed by Exchange Online. We're also going to implement the logic to figure out what type of group we're dealing with, and then we're going to start building out the feedback messages of letting someone know what's going on. And then this last part here in Rewst 106, we're going to see how do we use the existing workflow that we built inside of another workflow. So we'll have a parent workflow, and then inside of the parent workflow will contain a sub workflow. So how do we do that? We'll also take a look at a feature called with items. This allows us to add a user to multiple groups or remove a user from multiple groups. So that's the concept of with items. And in this session, we're going to finish off our exercise by sending off an email to the person who filled out the form. So our workflow is going to look something like this when we're all done. We're going to build out a workflow, encapsulate it as a sub workflow within a parent workflow. And then in Rewst 104, we're going to create an option generator for this group field to help us configure what groups show up in that dropdown. So again, thank you guys for being here. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday, whatever that Monday or this day has in store for you.